India has asked the Central Bank of India to work on it, on making the rupee more appealing and accessible globally. Why is this important and how can India do it? We'll discuss that tonight. In China, phone maker Xiaomi has become a car maker and its EV debut is a super hit. 90,000 orders on day one and a 7-month waiting period. But the company will incur millions of dollars in losses because of this car. We'll explain why. In West Asia, Israel attacks the Iranian embassy in Syria. Iran says it will respond. Is Netanyahu angling for a wider conflict? What is the strategy here? In the US, lawmakers write to the Justice Department about rising anti-Hindu crimes and temple attacks. Indonesia's new leader goes to meet Xi Jinping in China even before he takes office. We'll tell you why. Bangladesh's Prime Minister has a stinging reply for the opposition's India Out campaign. Vistara Airlines hits turbulence, flights cancelled and delayed. We'll tell you what's going on there. DR Congo gets its first woman Prime Minister. We'll bring you her story. Also a report on what big tech knows about you and how they're making billions off you. Finally, the art of doing nothing and why all of us must learn it. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Taiwan's frontline island on alert amid provocations by Chinese civilian drones. Erdan Island is just 5 kilometers from the Chinese coast. Taipei asks its soldiers stationed there to increase their vigilance. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory. An Israeli airstrike killed 7 aid workers in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu says it was quote-unquote unintentional. Most of those killed were foreigners who were delivering food aid to Gazans. Israel launches a probe amid international outcry. In India, trouble for the Trinamool Congress's leader Mahua Moitra. The Enforcement Directorate files a money laundering case against her in the Cash for Query row. In December, Mahua Moitra was expelled from Parliament for allegedly accepting gifts to ask questions in the Lok Sabha. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi sworn in for his third term. The former army chief will remain president till 2030. He won the election in December with over 89% of the vote. Since 2013, al-Sisi has been in power in the most populous country in the Arab world. Gold hits a record peak. Prices rise to a new high over the prospect of interest rate cuts later this year. In March, the bullion rose by 9.3%, its biggest monthly growth since July 2020. And Ajax suspend its new CEO over allegations of insider trading. In 2023, Alex Cruz bought more than 17,000 Ajax shares. Just a week before his appointment was announced, Cruz had taken charge of the Dutch club on 15th March. Central banks have a thankless job. A lot of pressure, but not a lot of credit. Just consider India's central bank, the RBI or the Reserve Bank of India. Consider everything they do. They protect the Indian rupee from volatility, they defend Indians from inflation, they keep our interest rates in check and they keep commercial banks honest. None of it is easy. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given the RBI a new task, an arguably tougher one. The Prime Minister was speaking at the RBI's Foundation Day. Listen to what he said.
ये प्रयास होना चाहिए कि हमारा रुपया ज्यादा एक्सेसिबल भी हो, एक्सेप्टेबल भी हो.
Globalize the rupee. That's the message from the government. But what does it mean? A global currency is basically a reserve currency. It is used in global trade. It's held by most central banks and it's easily convertible. You can buy and sell this currency easily. And how many such currencies are there? Not many. The US dollar is the biggest one. It makes up 60% of all foreign exchange reserves, plus 40 to 50% of global trade. Other examples are the euro and the pound sterling. But nowadays, a lot of countries are de-dollarizing. They're moving away from the US dollar. China wants to globalize its yuan. BRICS is talking about its own currency. And now India wants to globalize the rupee. But why the sudden rush? Well, one reason is financial. Many countries are struggling with foreign reserves. They use dollars to repay loans and to trade. As a result, they're running out of dollars, like Sri Lanka did in 2022. So these countries are looking at other options, like trading in local currencies. The second reason is political. Some major exporters are under Western sanctions. Countries like Russia, China, even Iran, they're all sanctioned, so you cannot use dollars to buy from them. So what do countries do? They look beyond the US dollar. They try to use local currencies. And India's reasons are a mixture of both of these, political and economic. We trade a lot with countries like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, countries that are low on dollar reserves. We also trade with sanctioned countries like Russia and Iran. So we need alternatives to the US dollar. But beyond this, there is also a third reason, a strategic goal. India is the fifth largest economy in the world. It aims to become the third largest in this decade. So we're talking about a global power, which means you cannot depend on foreign currencies. You need something more reliable, like a globalized Indian rupee. It would protect you from foreign volatility. It will also insulate you from economic warfare. So we've answered the what and the why. Now let's look at the how. How can India globalize the rupee? It won't happen overnight. Just look at the Chinese. After the 2008 recession, they decided to globalize their currency, the yuan. It's been almost 16 years now, yet the yuan makes up just 5.8% of international payments. It's still behind the dollar, the euro and the pound, so do not expect miracles with the rupee. With that said, let's look at what India can do. And just a disclaimer, there is no exact handbook here. Different currencies had different paths to globalization. The pound used colonization, the dollar used the Second World War, and the euro used institutions. But if a country wants to globalize its currency, most economists talk about 4 requisites, 4 things that you need to do. The first is financial stability. Your overall debt must be under control, your inflation must be moderate, and your per capita income should be high. Various RBI committees have talked about this. They say fiscal deficit should be less than 3.5% of the GDP, and inflation must be less than 5%. And these levels must be maintained over a long period of time. Only then you signal stability. And I'm afraid India is not there yet. India's fiscal deficit is 5.8% of the GDP, so we need to fix it first. That is the first requirement. The second and the third requisites are linked. And the logic is quite simple here. You need more people to buy and hold the rupee. But they should have a reason to do that. Either India should export a lot of goods, in which case you can use the rupee to buy those goods or buy these exports. Or it must be great investment. The Indian rupee must be great investment. Let's look at exports first. India makes up just 2% of global exports. The US makes up 8.5% and China makes up almost 15%. So India's share needs to increase. If not, other countries may not want the rupee. Just look at Russia. They decided to call off the rupee-ruble trade system. Why? Because Moscow was stuck with billions of unusable rupees. Which brings us to the investment angle. Let's go back to the year 2010. Assume that you had $1 back then. $1 was worth 45 Indian rupees in 2010. Almost 14 years have passed. Today, that $1 is worth almost 83 Indian rupees. So the dollar has appreciated in value, but the rupee has not, meaning the rupee has not been a good investment. So you need to expand your exports and make the rupee desirable. Finally, let's look at the fourth requisite, removing state controls. You can pump endless foreign money into Indian markets, but the opposite is not allowed. You cannot take unlimited amounts of rupee outside India. There are limits on this movement, and these limits are called capital controls, and investors do not like them. What if their funds get stuck in India? What if the value keeps falling? So investors like currencies that flow freely. Same with currency value. The rupee is often defended by the Central Bank of India. If it falls too steeply, the RBI intervenes. They sell dollars in the market to prop up the rupee. Again, investors do not like this. They prefer a robust, free-floating currency. So the challenge ahead is huge. But the good news is that India is quite serious about it. In 2022, the RBI announced a big move. It allowed international trade settlements in rupees. Basically, traders could buy and sell in rupees, and many countries now accept the Indian currency. Countries like Bhutan, Nepal, the UAE, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, even Iran. All these countries allow trade in Indian rupees. Plus, India's exports are gradually rising. India's total exports were worth $500 billion in the year 2020. They increased to $770 billion in 2022, and they were expected to reach $900 billion in the last financial year. We are still waiting for official data. So to recap, there is a strategic need to globalize the rupee. There is political will to do it, and the financial requisites are slowly being achieved. This is a marathon where focus is the key. Our second story is about cars, specifically electric vehicles, EVs. If you're looking to buy an EV, you are in luck, because right now this is a buyer's market. The prices are going down and the number of companies offering electric cars is going up. In countries like China, there is in fact an oversupply, and a new player has zoomed into the arena, looking to shake up the industry and park itself in pole position. We're talking about Xiaomi. A household name in smartphones and electronics, Xiaomi is now entering the electric car market. Last week, they launched their first EV, a sedan called the Speed Ultra 7, or SU7 for short, Speed Ultra 7. This car has made a rocking debut. Within 24 hours of launch, Xiaomi had more than 88,000 orders. And now there's a long wait list. Many of those who've booked a car will have to wait for at least 6 months to get it. It's a dream launch. Xiaomi's new car is a super hit even before it rolls out of showrooms. The company's stock price has surged by 16%. Their market value has jumped by more than $7 billion. Xiaomi's valuation, in fact, touched $55 billion today, which makes it more valuable than car companies like General Motors and Ford. General Motors is worth $52 billion, Ford is worth $53 billion, and Xiaomi at $55 billion is bigger than them. The electric car has supercharged Xiaomi. As of now, the SU7 is available only in China, but this launch is generating global buzz. And the reason for that is Xiaomi's business strategy. It's aggressive pricing. The base model is priced at around $29,000. That's close to 25 lakh rupees. Now compare this to a Tesla. A Xiaomi car is at least $4,000 cheaper than a Tesla. And at this price point, Xiaomi is not making a profit. In fact, it is losing money. On every car sold, it will lose $10,000 per car. So this price war with Tesla will bleed Xiaomi. Let me show you an assessment. It is by City Research. They say if Xiaomi sells 60,000 cars this year, the company is set to lose 4.1 billion yuan, which is around $560 million US. So at this rate, the more cars they sell, the more money they will lose. Which brings us to the question, why is Xiaomi doing it? Because it can, and the Chinese state is helping it. Xiaomi has a cash reserve of $15 billion, so it can afford the price war and the loss. Plus, it has the backing of Beijing. You see, Xiaomi is not building these cars on its own. It is using a state-owned manufacturer, a company called the BAIC Group. They are the ones making the Xiaomi EV. China already has a large EV ecosystem. Xiaomi is simply leveraging it to enter a new market and to disrupt it. They can sustain a short-term loss to get a foothold in the EV market. And China's state infrastructure is helping them do this. Beijing has spent big money to build it, this infrastructure. From 2009 to 2023, Beijing handed out $28 billion. $28 billion. This was in the form of subsidies and tax breaks to EV makers. And these SOPs attracted many players. They made China the world's largest EV market. In fact, now it's overcrowded. There are at least 200 car makers in China, 200 companies. They make both EVs and hybrid cars. Last year, China cut some of these subsidies, so these 200 companies are now looking to compete in new markets outside China. And the rest of the world should be on guard. The US Treasury Secretary has already issued warnings. Her name is Janet Yellen. She says China is treating the global economy like a dumping ground. They have more EVs than buyers, so they're sending their cars overseas. In fact, let me quote from her statement. I'm concerned about global spillovers from the excess capacity that we are seeing in China. China's overcapacity distorts global prices and production patterns and hurts American firms and workers as well as firms and workers around the world. Europe is concerned too. According to one report, 1 out of 4 EVs sold in Europe this year will be made in China, 1 out of 4. And Chinese EV makers are eyeing India too, including the company called BYD, the world's biggest seller of EVs today. Last month, BYD announced that it wants to cover 90% of India's EV market by the end of 2024. This year, 90% of the market. So the Chinese are coming for everyone. And it's no longer about who sells the best car. It's about who can bleed the other side more. It's not a level playing field. Chinese companies have state subsidies. They artificially lower prices and kill competition. So governments around the world need to step in and protect their markets and their companies against Chinese dumping. It's a major escalation in West Asia, one that could pit Iran against Israel. We're talking about a disastrous confrontation. It could drag the whole region to war. So what exactly happened? On Monday evening, missiles targeted a building in Syria, in the capital Damascus. This building was an Iranian consulate. It was located right next to the embassy. And what was the damage? 7 Iranian officers were killed in the strike. Among them were 2 big names. Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahedi. He was a senior commander in the Quds force. He served in Lebanon and Syria between 2008 and 2016, so an experienced foreign hand for Iran. The other was Brigadier General Mohammad Hadi Haji Rahimi. He was Zahedi's deputy. So 2 top Iranian generals have been killed. The question is, by whom? Both Syria and Iran point fingers at Israel. The Syrian government has released an elaborate statement. It says Israeli jets flew in from Golan Heights. Some of their missiles were shot down, but the rest hit the Iranian building. Now, as you would expect, the regime is livid. The Iranian state media has released a statement from the supreme leader, and he is promising to punish Israel.
The evil regime of Israel will be punished by the hands of our brave men. We will make them regret this crime and similar ones, God willing.
And what is Israel saying? They haven't confirmed or denied the allegation. Their only response was no comment. But there is precedent for such attacks. In the past, Israel has carried out multiple strikes inside Syria. One of them was last week, in fact. Israeli bombs targeted Aleppo and Damascus. Around 53 people were killed. Another strike was in January. Again, Damascus was targeted by Israel. They killed around 5 senior Iranian officers. Now, these attacks raise a couple of questions. A, what are Iranian officers doing in Syria? The government says advising, basically helping the Syrian military fight the rebels. And B, why does Israel target them? Well, Israel accuses Iran of building an axis of evil, of using Syria to support anti-Israel groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Israel says Iran funnels money and weapons via Syria. Hence these attacks. But Monday's strike went one step ahead. Not only did they hit a foreign embassy, they took out top Iranian generals. The question is why? Why would Benjamin Netanyahu risk an escalation? We can think of 3 possible explanations. One is a preemptive strike. Maybe Israel had intel on something big, maybe an attack coordinated by Syria. It's unlikely, but it is possible. The second reason is to test Iranian resolve. We've seen a lot of tough words from Tehran, but we haven't seen actions. Iranian proxies have been attacking ships and planes, but not Iran. The regime has stayed away from direct involvement. But an Israeli attack on Rafah could change that. Most people agree that it would be a bloody operation. Thousands of civilians could die, and that may tempt Iran to get involved. So perhaps Israel was testing the waters to see how far it can push Iran. And finally, the third explanation, to drag the Americans in. Joe Biden has been scaling back his support to Israel. There is pressure to cut off military aid. But a face-off with Iran would change all of that. It would force Biden to extend more support to Israel. We're seeing indications of that already. Most agencies have blamed Israel for the airstrikes. China and Russia have also accused them, but the US has refused to do so.
Bombed Iran's consulate building in Damascus today, apparently killed an Iranian military commander. Did you know about this in advance? Are you concerned this is an escalation?
So look, I'm aware of the reports. Our team is looking into it, so I'm not going to get ahead of anything just yet, but obviously we're aware of the reports and our team is looking into it. I'm just not going to go beyond that.
What happens next? There are massive protests in Tehran. Many of them want action against Israel, so the regime may not have an option. They've already been weakened by protests and terror attacks, so now is not the time to appear helpless. But what kind of response are we looking at? Iran could use proxies to hurt Israel, it could use cyber attacks to cripple infrastructure, or it could choose the nuclear option, to hit back directly. But at this point, such a deadly response looks unlikely. And whatever Iran chooses, Israel is ready.
Every day we gain further evidence that we find ourselves in a multi-front war, that is both offensively and defensively. We operate everywhere, every day, in order to prevent our enemies from gaining strength and in order to make it clear to anyone who acts against us, all over the Middle East, that the price for action against Israel will be a heavy one.
This is what long wars do. They create more scope for escalation, for miscommunication, and eventually more destruction. Israel's focus should be on defeating the Hamas to wind up the current war in Gaza, not triggering a new one. Our next story is from the US. It's about the rise in hate crimes against Hindus, a rising trend of Hindu temples being attacked, which has led to, and I'm quoting, an increased collective anxiety among Hindu Americans. These are the words of a US lawmaker, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat from the state of Illinois. He's been leading the charge against anti-Hindu hate crimes in the US along with 4 other Hindu members of Congress. Together, they wrote to the US Justice Department recently asking for an update on investigations into vandalism at Hindu temples. They want to know what the police are doing to prevent these crimes and who is behind the attacks. Here's our report.
A few days ago, 5 members of the US Congress decided to sound an alarm. They wrote a letter to the US Justice Department asking for information about hate crimes. But not all hate crimes. The 5 members of Congress are looking for something specific. Hate crimes targeted at Hindus. Specifically, information on the recent spate of attacks on Hindu temples in the US. Over the last few months, many temples have been targeted in both the US and Canada. The people behind the attacks seem to be Khalistanis, who want to break up India and carve out a separate nation called Khalistan from the Indian state of Punjab. Khalistanis had their heyday back in the 1980s, but India crushed the violent movement, and Khalistanis fled the nation and made their way to countries like the US and Canada, and continued to propagate their ways as the West turned a blind eye and justified their separatism and terrorism as freedom of speech. Fast forward a few decades, and this is what you get. Attacks on Hindu temples by the descendants of these separatists. It got especially bad around the New Year. A Hindu American politician claimed that 6 Hindu temples were attacked in just 2 weeks. This includes the Sri Swaminarayan Temple in Newark, New Jersey, and several temples in the state of California. Khalistanis are suspected to be behind these attacks because they announced it themselves. They wrote the phrase Khalistan Zindabad on every temple they vandalized. That means long live Khalistan. They also wrote the phrase Modi is a terrorist, referring to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, political opinions are one thing, but you can't deface a place of worship, and you can't terrorize a community. That is a hate crime. And multiple such crimes took place in quick succession around the turn of the new year, with similar things written in each instance, suggesting that the attacks were coordinated. It's been a few months since all this took place, meaning American law enforcement has had time to round up the perpetrators. So you'd think that the cops are on top of things, right? Sadly, that's not the case. As the 5 Hindu members of Congress have made clear in their letter, it states that they haven't been told of any leads. Hindus are living in fear and intimidation. The community is concerned. If we remove the layer of diplomacy, the Hindu members of Congress are effectively pulling the cops up. They demand to know what's going on, and they've issued an ultimatum. April 18th is the deadline. The Department of Justice has until then to give them an update and a plan on how to deal with rising anti-Hindu hate crimes. It's a sharp rebuke, and it draws attention to the plight of Hindus in America. Their places of worship are under attack by some who believe in a divisive political ideology. The United States of America is well known for preaching peace to others. It's high time that they get their house in order by reining in these divisive elements at home.
Back to China, which hosted a new leader this week. Prabowo Subianto, the incoming president of Indonesia. He's yet to be officially inaugurated. Indonesia has a long transition period, so while he won the election in February, the inauguration ceremony will take place only in October. But that did not stop Xi Jinping from inviting him and Subianto from traveling all the way to China.
You have chosen China as the destination of your first post-election visit and made a special trip to China during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which reflects the great importance you attach to China-Indonesia relations.
Xi was keen on meeting Prabowo Subianto, so he extended an invite. He asked Subianto to plan a trip before he was inaugurated, which is a break from convention and has raised eyebrows in Indonesia too. No president-elect has travelled abroad before the swearing-in ceremony. Subianto is the first to do so, and he did it with the permission of the outgoing president, Joko Widodo. So that's one reason why this visit has attracted attention. It's unconventional. The second reason is the political message it sends. Jakarta is signalling continuity in its relationship with Beijing. And it's an important relationship for both sides, not without challenges though. China is Indonesia's biggest economic partner. From 2010 to 2020, Indonesia has got some $15.9 billion in Chinese investments, almost 16 billion in 10 years. Subianto wants to keep this going. And this is what he told Xi Jinping in Beijing.
Once again, I would like to emphasize that I would like to continue the policies of President Joko Widodo. I am determined to use all his achievements as a foundation for my programs.
Policy continuity, that's his promise. He wants more business with China, and this will be a tricky maneuver. Indonesia is a key player in the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's an important bloc in Southeast Asia. Its members are at the receiving end of Chinese aggression. But as a bloc, ASEAN has failed to stand up to China. Look at the member countries individually. Most of them face China's military provocations. You have Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei. They all have disputes in the South China Sea. China claims the entire region. These other countries have competing claims. Same with Indonesia. Chinese claims in the South China Sea overlap with Indonesia's exclusive economic zone. Jakarta has challenged Beijing in some instances, but it has chosen not to be too vocal about it. It has been careful and calibrated. President Joko Widodo has walked a fine line. He pushed a policy of friendship with China. His goal was to engage with Beijing to focus on the economic relationship while maintaining lines of communication with the West too. And Subianto wants to continue this policy. China was the first stop in his trip. His next stop is Japan. In fact, Subianto arrived in Tokyo today. He will meet Fumio Kishida, the Japanese Prime Minister. Just like Joko Widodo, Subianto wants to work with both China and the West. But it won't be easy. As tensions continue to grow in the South China Sea, Beijing has increased its deployments in the region. The Chinese Coast Guard is attacking ships. They're striking Filipino vessels with water cannons almost every day now. Similar escalations against Indonesia may derail Subianto's plans, push him on the back foot, right at the start of his presidency. And that's the thing about doing business with China. It works only as long as you do it on their terms. Vantage continues after a short break.
Let's take a look at what actually the 2015 RTI reveals on the Kachtivu island that has been cited by the Congress party. Now, it states that 1974 agreement did not involve either acquiring or ceding of territory. This is what the 2015 RTI reveals, the territory that belongs to India, since the area in question had never been demarcated. So this is what 2015 RTI reveals, that the area was never demarcated, and under the agreements, the island of Kachtivu is on the Sri Lankan side of the water of the India-Sri Lanka International Maritime Boundary Line. This is what was there in the 2015 RTI, which has now been cited by the Congress party while hitting back at the centre over the allegations on Kachtivu. Pallavi continues. Pallavi and Aman continue to stay with us. Pallavi, now coming to you. The claim that is coming in from the Congress party is that there are discrepancies in the 2015 RTI report and the 2024 RTI report. And they have even questioned that, is that because the elections are near?
Absolutely. In fact, the whole of yesterday, the Congress party, Anjali, has been consistently making the point that, first of all, which I just mentioned, if like when the Prime Minister...
Let's turn to Bangladesh now. Their opposition has devised a new political strategy, or rather retrofitted an old one, the India out strategy. We saw it succeed in the Maldives last year, so Bangladesh's opposition is giving it a try. But their Prime Minister is having none of it. That's Sheikh Hasina. She's built a career on close ties with India, so Hasina is pushing back. Listen to what she said at a recent event.
I have a question for those politicians who are now saying boycott Indian goods. How many Indian saris do the wives have? And why are they not taking the saris from the wives and setting them on fire? Please ask BNP leaders. I have more questions for them. We are importing spices, onion, garlic, ginger and many other items from India. Why don't they cook without Indian spices? They must cook and eat food made without these spices.
No half measures there. Sheikh Hasina is on the charge, and she's got a point. Bangladesh's main opposition is the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and they want to boycott Indian products. But that's easier said than done. India exports essential commodities to Bangladesh like spices, oil and vegetables. So the Prime Minister's question is valid. Will the opposition boycott those too? We'll come to the economic angle in a bit, but first, let's look at the politics. How did this movement start? The trigger seems to have been the election in January. Sheikh Hasina's party won quite easily, but many activists and Bangladeshi expats pushed back. They did not just blame Hasina, they also blamed India. One such voice behind this movement is Pinaki Bhattacharya. He's an activist based in France. And look at what he said, I'm quoting, authorities in Bangladesh managed to conduct the farcical election after India covertly and overtly sided with the ruling party. A couple of problems here. One, he has not offered any proof. And two, Bangladesh's opposition chose to boycott the election. So what else did they expect? Of course, Sheikh Hasina's party cruised to victory. Right now, this India Out campaign is mostly online. Let me show you some pictures, in fact. These were all posted by Bangladeshi users. You can see popular Indian consumer products like oil and cosmetic products. But all of them have been crossed out. And look at the hashtags too. India out, hashtag boycott India, hashtag boycott Indian products. And these hashtags have thousands of posts. But will it work? Well, that depends on many factors. The BNP, the opposition party, does have a history of anti-India politics. They used it in the late 1970s, they used it again in the 1990s, so the idea is not new for the BNP, only the slogan is new. And they can thank Mohammad Muizzu for that. But making it work will be hard. In the Maldives, India Out became a street movement. It had clear electoral benefits. But in Bangladesh, that is not the case. The movement is largely online. It is being promoted by activists and leaders based abroad. And that is a key difference. Plus, in Bangladesh, a lot of money is at stake. The bilateral trade is worth almost $16 billion. India is Dhaka's top export destination in Asia, even higher than China. So no Bangladesh government can afford to push India away. And do not forget the culture and history. India and Bangladesh were once the same country. They fought together against Pakistan. So it's a relationship that runs deep. And by challenging it, the BNP is playing a dangerous game. Look at what this Bangladeshi commentator wrote. And I'm quoting again, instead of promoting national cohesion or furthering strategic objectives, the India Out campaign poses a risk of creating division, hindering economic development, and isolating Bangladesh on a regional level. We could not agree more. But what should India do about it? Ignore and move on, or keep a close eye on matters? Maybe the second option. It's clear that the India Out movement is not a nationwide campaign, yet Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina spoke about it. She decided it was important enough to criticize, and India should do the same. Maybe expand its outreach in Bangladesh, understand what its people think about India, and invest more in people-to-people ties. It's the best way to nip this movement in the bud. In India, it's been a turbulent few days for Vistara, one of the country's premium carriers. It operates close to 300 flights daily. Many of them are from India's biggest cities, but now Vistara finds itself in the middle of a crisis. Its pilots are calling in sick, flights are being delayed, many of them are being cancelled, passengers are stranded, and the government is seeking an answer. So what is behind this sudden crisis? Reports say it's the merger between Vistara and Air India. Our next report explains.
Chaos has gripped India's aviation sector again. And at the center of it is one airline, Vistara. On Monday, 50 Vistara flights were cancelled. 160 of them were delayed. The crisis continued on Tuesday. At least 38 flights have been cancelled, most of them from key cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Bengaluru. 70 more could be cancelled in the future. In fact, the cancellations got so bad that the centre had to intervene. The Ministry of Civil Aviation has taken notice. It has sought an explanation from the airline. So, what led to this chaos? The airline says it's because of staff unavailability, but reports suggest otherwise. Vistara pilots have reportedly sought sick leave en masse. Many of them have not turned up for work. Other pilots were pulled in to cover their shifts, but that wasn't enough. Thus, the flight disruptions. So why are the pilots not showing up? Well, Vistara is merging with Air India, so it has given pilots a revised contract. Reports say it includes a new salary structure. It has a fixed salary for 40 hours of flying, and for many pilots, this could mean a pay cut. For some, this cut could be more than 50% of their salary, so they weren't willing to accept it. According to reports, Vistara even issued an ultimatum to its pilots. It said, accept the new pay structure or be prepared for a pay cut. And that hasn't gone down well with many. Vistara began its operations in 2015. It was a joint venture between Tata Sons and Singapore Airlines. Tata had a 51% stake, Singapore Airlines had 49%. In 2022, Tata acquired Air India. The plan was to merge it with Vistara. Singapore Airlines would get a 25.1% stake in the new company. India has approved that merger. Singapore has given its nod as well. Brand Vistara is not changing till 2025, but it is already in the process of merging its staff with Air India. And it is this merger that seems to be behind the chaos. So what is Vistara doing about this? The airline has taken two measures to resolve this crisis. One, it's reducing the number of flights it operates, and two, it'll deploy larger aircraft on busier routes. Vistara is also offering refunds to customers. The carrier says it'll resume regular operations soon. But the government isn't convinced. The DGCA has pulled up the airline. That's the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the aviation authority in India. It wants Vistara to submit information daily. This includes the details of cancelled and delayed flights. Vistara has also been asked for a response on how it plans to navigate this situation. Currently, the carrier says the situation will be resolved soon. But the question is how? Vistara has no answer yet, so there could be more cancellations in the coming days. If you're flying Vistara anytime soon, make sure to double-check the status of your flight.
Now we turn to Africa, to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC has a new Prime Minister, their first ever female Prime Minister. Her name is Judith Suminwa Tuluka. She became PM yesterday after being appointed by President Felix Tshisekedi. She wasn't elected to the post, but that does not mean that she is a puppet, because in the DRC, the Prime Minister's post holds some sway. They have the power to oppose the president, especially if they come from different political parties. And that happens in the DRC because of coalition politics. All this is to say that the DRC has achieved a milestone in women empowerment. We in India send our best regards. After all, South Asia is a pioneer when it comes to women in top leadership. Sri Lanka and India were the first nations in the world with female Prime Minister. Sirimavo Bandaranaike for Sri Lanka and Indira Gandhi for India. So it's always good to see the practice spread across the world. The Democratic Republic of Congo has joined the ranks. It's one of the few African nations to do so, and that too before the likes of Western nations like the US. So the DRC's progress is even more impressive. But let's focus on the woman of the hour, Judith Tuluka. Tuluka is an experienced politician. Before becoming Prime Minister, she was a cabinet member. She served as the DRC's Minister of Planning from March last year. Before that, she was working with the President's office. So Tuluka and Tshisekedi have worked together before. It will help them hit the ground running now. Tuluka does not just have domestic experience, she has also worked with the United Nations at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. There she worked on peace and development efforts in the DRC. And this wealth of experience is backed by educational qualifications as well. She has a degree in applied economics, which rounds up her impressive background. And all this will serve her well when she officially takes on the duties of Prime Minister, because she will have a challenge on her hands. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the second largest country in Africa by size. It has about 112 million citizens. It has an abundance of natural resources like copper and cobalt. But the DRC is one of the poorest nations in the world. The reason? Years of internal conflict, armed insurgencies, guerrilla groups, warlords going after the rich mineral wealth. The DRC faces all of this. And it's another reason why the country needed a female head of government. Rebel-run territory is lawless. Sexual violence is common, even by factions aligned with the government. DRC leaders have been working to change this, sending pro-government rebels for training in Europe.
Before all these training courses that we have taken, we could let ourselves do whatever we wanted. But after all these courses, especially on the rules of combatants, the protection of medical missions, respect and protection of children, protection of women, prohibition of sexual violence, and the protection of famine and humanitarian access, and so on. Now, we feel we can see there is a change on the ground, and so we can't let ourselves do whatever we want anymore.
This is a goal of the DRC government, bringing societal change in the attitude towards women. Getting a female Prime Minister was part of this plan, an election campaign promise by President Tshisekedi. His coalition won the December election by a landslide, and he delivered on his promise. That is what led to Tuluka's elevation. Now it's up to her to deliver, work towards the betterment of her nation. And we wish her the very best. For our next story, let me ask you a question. What does big tech know about you? Well, the answer is practically everything. Big tech knows everything about you. They have all your data and they're using it to cut million-dollar deals. Facebook has been accused of giving Netflix access to private messages. Google has been accused of tracking users, even in incognito mode. There have been lawsuits. There have been settlements. But big tech is unlikely to stop anytime soon. We live in a world where data means money and privacy means very little. Our next report tells you how big tech has been misusing your data and making money off you.
Imagine a day in your life. Your smartphone wakes you up. Your smartwatch tracks your fitness goals. Your cab rides are tracked. Your commute is mapped. Your coffee order is documented. And so are your food preferences. The way you live, the clothes you wear, the songs you like, and even the dreams you dream. All of that data is collected. In the 21st century, privacy is a relic of the past. Big tech knows everything about you. It collects hordes of personal data because in today's world, data is money. And it's being used to seal billion-dollar deals. Take Netflix and Facebook, for example. In 2017, Facebook launched its own streaming service. It was called Facebook Watch. Facebook had lofty goals. They were planning original TV shows. But in 2018, all plans were shelved. Why? Because Netflix asked them to. But don't think of this as some friendly compromise. Netflix knew Facebook could emerge as a competitor, so they cut them a deal. Netflix was already a large advertiser to Facebook, but since 2018, they have ramped up spending. In 2018, Netflix spent $150 million on ads on Facebook. By 2019, it went up to $200 million. Not just that, there were other deals. If you thought your messages were private on Facebook, think again. Netflix was allegedly granted access to inboxes of Facebook users. This was in exchange of million-dollar advertising deals. So Facebook was showing your messages to Netflix and in turn earning millions. All of this has come out in a recent lawsuit. It's a class action antitrust case against Meta. But Facebook isn't the only one hoarding your data. So is Google. How many times have you browsed in incognito mode? You thought it was a great shield against tracking. But the truth is, even in a private browsing mode, Google was still collecting your data. In 2020, it faced a class action lawsuit in the US. It accused the tech giant of invading people's privacy. It sought $5 billion in damages. Google disputed the claims, but it agreed to settle the lawsuit. So Google will now destroy hundreds of billions of private browsing records. It will also have to submit to restrictions on its power to track users. So, 2 lawsuits, 2 big tech companies, and hordes of personal data. It shows how much big tech knows about us. It tracks every gesture, monitors every purchase, analyzes every comment, and influences our behavior, with one algorithm and advertisement at a time. Big tech looms large as the ultimate arbiter of our digital existence. They are truly the Orwellian overlords of the digital age. If you wonder how much big tech knows about us, the answer is practically everything. And they use this data to their advantage. In today's age where data is king, big tech has reduced us to mere pawns.
Are you tired? If you belong to the 21st century, the answer is most likely yes. Our lives and jobs have become increasingly complex. Now, keeping busy is the modus operandi. Laboring over to-do lists is the norm, and stress, you could say, is our best friend. Often this is good. It helps us set higher benchmarks for ourselves, then pushes us to achieve them. But there is a flip side here. It can shift focus from personal well-being, and this comes with severe consequences. Anxiety and stress-related diseases are on the rise. 1 in 4 workers the world over are experiencing burnout, and that is the average, 1 in 4. In the US, 43% workers suffer from burnout. In India, the number stands at 59%, and in South Korea, it is 70%. And these are only a few examples. The fact is, no one is immune to burnout. But the Dutch claim there is a way out. It is called Nixon. It is as simple as doing nothing, quite literally. Nixon comes from the Dutch word niks, which means nothing. So Nixon refers to the art of doing nothing. It is difficult to define what nothing means here. After all, we are always doing something, even when we are sleeping. But practicing Nixon is about being idle or doing something without a goal, the goal of being productive. This does not mean that one stares at a wall, because that's just creepy. Doom scrolling or meditation does not qualify either, because your brain remains actively engaged. Nixon simply involves moments of relaxation combined with easy automatic activities where the brain is allowed to switch off. It could mean just hanging around or listening to music or knitting. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. People can do what works for them, and it seems like many have been. Over the past few years, Nixon has intrigued the world. It has become a publishing sensation. There are fitness clubs with Nixon classes, even experts who teach people how to do, well, nothing. Nixon may have been born in the Netherlands, but today it is a global rage. Though we should point something here, the Dutch are not the only ones who support this theory. The Danish have a concept called hygge. It refers to staying in, not doing much, and just being cozy. Then there is lagom. It's a Swedish concept of accepting life with a moderation mindset. But it's not just about cool words or capitalism working its magic with wellness trends. It is about the wide-ranging benefits of slowing down. There are mental perks here. Ironically, doing nothing makes us more productive. It allows us to rest, to come back with more focus, with sustained attention. It boosts creativity. And then there are physical advantages. Nixon curtails the aging process. Believe it or not, it strengthens the immune system. There are emotional advantages as well, like reduced anxiety and stress and improved mood. And this is enough to encourage most of us to practice Nixon. The problem is, it can be difficult. Doing nothing is a tough ask. It is not easy to let go of outcomes. It requires some amount of rewiring, because humans have a tendency of thinking in terms of doing and not being. And Nixon is about actively carving out the time to just be. If you're thinking on similar lines, remember that Nixon is called an art for a reason. It needs to be cultivated. So find the balance between working hard and taking a beat. Try to push through the initial discomfort. Choose it over the familiarity of busyness. Do something without an objective for a change, but do it with purpose. And dare to be idle, because stress is a part of life, but burnout does not have to be. Vantage continues after a short break.
Let's take a look at what actually the 2015 RTI reveals on the Kachtivu island that has been cited by the Congress party. Now, it states that 1974 agreement did not involve either acquiring or ceding of territory. This is what the 2015 RTI reveals, the territory that belongs to India, since the area in question had never been demarcated. So this is what 2015 RTI reveals, that the area was never demarcated, and under the agreements, the island of Kachtivu is on the Sri Lankan side of the water of the India-Sri Lanka International Maritime Boundary Line. This is what was there in the 2015 RTI, which has now been cited by the Congress party while hitting back at the centre over the allegations on Kachtivu. Pallavi continues. Pallavi and Aman continue to stay with us. Pallavi, now coming to you. The claim that is coming in from the Congress party is that there are discrepancies in the 2015 RTI report and the 2024 RTI report. And they have even questioned that, is that because the elections are near?
Absolutely. In fact, the whole of yesterday, the Congress party, Anjali, has been consistently making the point that, first of all,
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In the White House, a bunny takes over the press briefing in an April Fool's joke. In Tokyo, residents push to view cherry blossoms ahead of rainy weather. And 2 days ahead of the 75th anniversary, NATO receives a special delivery. Its founding Washington Treaty was delivered to the headquarters. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1982, Argentina invaded the Falklands Islands. It was a British colony since 1892. But Argentina had long proclaimed its sovereignty over the Falklands. The invasion led to the Falklands War. It ended with Britain regaining control of the islands. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Are you the Vice President?
Are you a senior White House official? Are you John Kirby? Where's your wife? I think thumbs up. Thumbs up. 2 thumbs up from the bunny. All right. Thank you. Bye. Happy Easter.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwa. Ladies and gentlemen, ahead of the battle in the kingmaker state of Uttar Pradesh, a piece of breaking news that's coming in with senior SP leader and Mulayam Singh Yadav's brother Shivpal Yadav has now written to Akhilesh Yadav, the SP chief, saying that he wants to leave the Badaun seat and he wants his son to contest from there. He has made that appeal to the SP chief Akhilesh Yadav. That is the piece of breaking news that's coming in where Shivpal Yadav wants to leave the Badaun seat. He has said that he wants his son to contest from Badaun ahead of the Lok Sabha election. This tussle taking place in the Samajwadi Party camp where Shivpal Yadav has written to Akhilesh Yadav saying he doesn't want to contest from the Badaun seat anymore and wants his son to contest from there. I'm joined by my colleague Siddhant, who's getting us this piece of breaking news. Siddhant, over to you. Give us the details.
Well, yes, that's right. So Shivpal Yadav has written a letter to Akhilesh Yadav and perhaps he has requested Akhilesh Yadav to give ticket to his son instead of him from Badaun seat. Now, this letter could be seen as maybe a political move by Shivpal Yadav, as we all are aware that the big challenge for Akhilesh Yadav at this point in time is to keep his own house intact. Given there is a lot of infighting within the Samajwadi Party. In fact, we saw on the seats of Rampur and Muradabad where Akhilesh Yadav and Azam Khan had different opinions, different viewpoints as far as giving tickets to candidates were concerned. In fact, S.T. Hassan had to put down the nominations, and Ruchi Veera was given a green signal by the Samajwadi Party to contest election from Muradabad after pressure from Azam Khan. So, this has been going on in Samajwadi Party in perhaps every election. This time around, we have been given to understand that Shivpal Yadav, Uncle Shivpal Yadav has written letter